For now, it's time for us to turn our attention to this afternoon's speaker. Now, you've heard a lot this weekend about areas of concern, let's call them, reasons that we need to pay attention. There is a sense of urgency about the future of this country, and certainly there are some things that we need to be very aware of and very actively involved in changing. But at the same time, there are many reasons for optimism about the future of this country and this economy. And that is the subject that our next guest will be addressing. His name is Harry Veryser. He is the former Director of Graduate Studies at the University of Detroit Mercy. He is also former Chairman of Economics at Walsh College. He is also the former owner and Chairman of the Board for Veryser Stamping, so he has a foot in both academia and in industry. It's a very unusual and a very valuable combination of backgrounds, and he's going to share his insights with you this afternoon. Please give a warm welcome to Professor Harry Veryser.
Thanks, Dan. I better get a glass of water, so. Okay, thank you very much. I am very pleased to speak at Northwood. I've spoken to the Freedom Forum before, and I also started my academic career here, at least in higher education. As I taught at Northwood, I was a full-time faculty member from 1972 to 1973. It was a long time ago, but a short time ago. And you'll find that time goes very quickly in this life when you look back. It's interesting, I talked to one of my friends, and they were just getting married, and he said, we're very happy we're going to get married in 2010. And I said, really? Why? Oh, we can always figure out our anniversary. We just subtract 10. We know what our anniversary is. And I said, oh, well, that means in 2060 you will have been married 50 years. And the couple looked at me like shock. You know, how could 2060 ever come? And I said, well, I graduated from high school 50 years ago. So I've seen 50 years and what can happen. So in any event, today I want to talk a little bit about the American economy. There are some good signs and there are some bad signs. I think overall, what you have to keep in mind is history has various turning points that you cannot see coming. And where things look very dark, suddenly there can be a change, and the change can be very good. And I think that there are some characteristics of a very, very good change coming for you folks in a lot of ways. And just to talk about it, we talk about the principle of compound interest and technological development. Now, all of you probably have had a course where you've talked about compound interest, and you say, well, you know, if I invest $10,000 at this time and it compounds at 4%, you know, I'm going to get maybe $300,000 20 years from now. Why? Because of the compounding effect. Okay, I have a friend of mine who I went to school with, invested $500 in a company called Medtronics, and that stock today is worth about $200,000. And what happened? They compounded it. They reinvested it. The profits were reinvested, and the company became better over time. And so, in a sense, there's compounding going on in finance, but there's also compounding going on in the scientific area and in the technological area. Now, remember how compounding works. The profits today are reinvested, they become principal, and then they're reinvested again. And that yields a dividend or income, and that becomes principal. And gradually the principal grows, and then suddenly it reaches what? A takeoff point. And when it reaches that takeoff point, that's what you're looking for. Similarly, it's true in the technological sphere. It took us about 3,000 years worth of scientific development to get to 1700 or 1800. And between 1700 and 1800, or between, say 1000 BC and 1700, people didn't live that much different. They didn't have hot and cold running water. They didn't have any of the luxuries that we think of today. And lifespan wasn't that much different. The lifespan for Romans, average lifespan, about 22 years. Average lifespan in the year 1800, about 23 or 24 years. And then suddenly, there was a takeoff. Why? Because they hit that point. Now think of it. Every idea opens up options. Okay? One of the reasons why Leonardo da Vinci could not make his inventions real was because the subsidiary inventions weren't there. You know, for example, one of the major developments in Western thought or for the world was the invention of the steam engine. Why didn't the steam engine happen earlier? Well, the technology, the steel wasn't there. Okay? In 1500, the monks, who pretty much ran the technological system, their property was stolen from them by Henry VIII. And at that time, they were working on the alloys necessary to develop the steam engine. Okay? Because remember, you can have the idea of the steam engine, but unless you have the right type of alloy where the boiler can hold the pressure, there's no steam engine. You can have all the drawings in the world, but that technology hadn't developed. Now, when I was your age in college, not so long ago, okay, we had Dick Tracy, and he had that watch. Remember that watch? You know, and he spoke of the watch. Maybe you can see the cartoons. Okay, this thing that you carry around was not possible because the subsidiary inventions hadn't been done yet. There weren't transistors. There weren't there's probably 1,000 inventions in here that had to come to fruition for this thing to exist. Okay, and maybe a lot more. And what happens is one invention opens it up for another invention, which opens up for another invention, and then you get a takeoff point. In other words, everything's there, and suddenly what happens? You have the steam engine. Okay, and then everything's there, and suddenly what happens? You have the computer. Okay, those things that you're doing I guess probably you're doing a paper on or whatever else, were not possible when I first started in business. We just had electric typewriters and maybe kind of a clumsy sort of Xerox machine. And all of that happened within that time. So what's happening underneath the surface, okay, on a technological basis is people are still inventing things. And as they're inventing things, they're opening up options. And as they open up options, new inventions will become available. We don't know what will happen 50 years from now, say, when you celebrate your 50th wedding anniversaries. But it will be technologically much better, provided we don't stop the march of technology. Now, it's been stopped twice in history. It's been stopped by government. Okay? The Romans were very close to having ships that were propelled by having turntables with oxen walking around them. Okay, now once you have that and you have paddle wheels, you don't need all these galley slaves. You suddenly release that labor. And the emperor stepped in. It's a true story. And so we couldn't have that, because if you have these oxen running these ships, now by the way, that doesn't take long before you get to other mechanical things. Well, the galley slaves, they won't have anything to do, and he stopped it. Similarly in China, in the 1300s and 1400s, the emperor stopped exploration. Okay, so that if the government does not step in and allows the inventions to go on, your life will be much better. You probably will never face open heart surgery. Okay, I mean, think of it. Today, where they used to have to open you up, they don't anymore. It's all laparoscopic. You see what I mean? So what's happening is you should look forward to a future, provided government does not get in the way. Provided government does not get in the way of a technologically superior future, where you will have goods and services that you have not even dreamed of. Because why? Because it's like compound interest. Okay? It's compound interest that's going on. Now, when we talk about it, we say we have the compound interest going on, and if we take a look at it, we can say in 1776, there was a major revolution that happened. In fact, there were 3 of them that really set the world on its path. The Declaration of Independence, which gave us political freedom, which was later embodied in the Northwest Ordinance, which was later embodied in the U.S. Constitution. And the optimistic thing now is the interest that most people now have in the Constitution. Okay? What else happened? The invention, the patenting of the steam engine, 1776. And what else happened? Well, the publication of The Wealth of Nations, which gave you the philosophy of what? Economic freedom. Now that was embodied in the American institutions. And what happened was, as America, think of it, from the foundation of that Constitution, went from being a small group of about 6 million people on the East Coast to, by the Civil War, we were the second economic power in the world next to England, okay, within that period of time. Now, England had a tremendous change, too, after the Napoleonic Wars. And this is another turning point that changed history. England, in 1815, their debt, their ratio of debt to GDP was 200%. Okay, the British government was, after the Napoleonic Wars, was exhausted, it was broke, and they were looking forward to a very, very bleak future. And in that time, three things happened that set England on a path to enormous expansion, to become #1 economic power in the, from 1815 to 1914. Now remember, Edmund Burke was very pessimistic about England. He had seen the French Revolution. He made sure when he was buried in an unmarked grave, because he knows that these leftist types like to desecrate graves. Okay, and what he said was what? I don't want them desecrating my grave. Very pessimistic. Yet, within 20 years, his country was on the road to what? To worldwide superpower status during that century. And four things contributed to it. England enacted a whole series of what? They repealed their income tax. Okay? They repealed, there was a parliament that sat and it actually repealed more laws than it passed. It had the application of steam power to industrialization, and the population exploded. Okay, notice between 1700, and I'll just give you the optimism, between 1700 and today, in 1700, for every one person living then, there's 100 people living. There's 8 people living today. However, for every dollar of GDP then, there's $100 of GDP now. In other words, for every person that was born, that went to adulthood, the GDP expanded about 7 to 8 times. Okay? Now, they didn't think that would happen. When Thomas Malthus wrote his book on population, he was looking backwards. He says, this is what happened. Population can't expand faster than the roots of subsistence. He looked backwards, but did not look forward. Okay? And so England then became a major power. Now, the United States economy can turn around very quickly if it adopts free market principles. American companies right now are holding $4 trillion in cash. That is about 5 times the stimulus. And if that cash were released and invested, it's not going to go into a one-term shot like the stimulus did. It's going to go into actual functioning businesses. And these functioning businesses will do what? Will create permanent jobs that last a long time because they'll create more goods and services, more businesses that will be producing products over a long period of time. So what I want to stress to you is the potential for an economic explosion is there. Okay, the potential is there for this country to turn around and turn around quickly. Americans are very entrepreneurial people. Okay, what I've been told, when you travel, if you get in trouble, find an American. They'll figure it out. They'll figure some way out. Okay, there's no people has ever been as entrepreneurial as you guys looking in the mirror, because we are very entrepreneurial and we have a way of figuring things out very quickly. And what we are observing, and the pessimism, and I don't think this mess and this economy is over. I'll give you a little pessimism on that. The economy is stalled now. Now, what do I mean by that? 65% of the jobs in this country are are created by small businessmen. Okay? They can't get loans now. Why? Because every small businessman, and I was one that did this, you borrow on your home equity and your trust funds and your life insurance policies to raise the capital, the liquid capital to run the business. Okay? I have a friend of mine, give you an example. He's in the appraisal business. Okay? He had a line of credit in his house, $89,000. What happened in the recession, that's not quite over yet, his bank called him up and said, your house isn't worth that, we're canceling your line of credit. Which meant his wife and he had to cash in everything to get the liquid capital to make that business work. Okay, we lost about $7 trillion in home equity. We gained about $1 trillion back. That means that those trillions of dollars are not there to finance things. And that's why small businessmen are at a point where it's stalled. But it's not dead. It's stalled. Now, what is it that we have to do? Okay? And I will make a very controversial statement to you. There is no capitalistic system. There is no free market system. It only occurs as a byproduct. Now, let me explain what I mean by a byproduct. There isn't any such thing as happiness. Happiness occurs when you have the possession of a good thing. In other words, you don't go to the store, there's not a can there that says happiness. And there isn't somebody you marry, and that says happiness, right? And there isn't an automobile you drive that has happiness car on it. It's what? It's when you have something that's good that brings about happiness. Okay? Now, what brings about a free market, or the prosperity, I would rather say? The first thing, and these are the things you almost have to fight for, is to strengthen private property. Whatever you should do, whenever you're voting, always vote and work for politicians who do what? Strengthen private property. And the rabbi referred to it. He says that which belongs to everybody belongs to nobody. Nobody will take care of it, and there's no incentive. Okay? And so one of the major problems we have here in Detroit is the government refused to enforce the landlord-tenant laws. Now, I had a student of mine who went into the business of renting places out. And he was a minority student, and he and his buddy from the service started buying apartment buildings. And everything was fine, and they cash flowed until a drug dealer moved in. And the city of Detroit refused to move the drug dealer out, citing the landlord-tenant laws. And guess what happened? All of his good tenants left. The building is now a burnt-out hulk. And he said, Professor, I'll even give this to you as my graduation present. Okay, here it is. You see, if you don't strengthen private property, what happens? Okay, you get this kind of thing. And it was a refusal, really, of the government of Detroit to do that. And you can drive around here and see the results of that. Okay, number two, you have to have a sound currency. Now, this is where my optimism is really coming forward, because there's a group called the Council on Foreign Relations. And it is really the wellspring of liberalism in this country. They are now writing articles in their magazine, Foreign Affairs, in favor of a gold standard. The establishment is at its wit's end. They don't know what to do. They have a monster on their hands that they can't control. And there's now pressure on the Japanese, and if Wall Street Journal this morning, what did they say? They said, hey guys, we don't want you printing up too many yen and starting a currency war. Now, we don't mind if you print a little bit of money, but don't print enough money so that your yen drops and everything in Japan becomes cheap and you're a competitor against the United States. You see? And they're beginning to realize that the international currency systems are broken. And when you have people like the head of the World Bank and the chief economist for the Council on Foreign Relations talking about gold and a strong currency system, that's going to filter down. because they realize they have to go back to that. Now, the next one is the rule of law. Okay? Businessmen, when they invest, they're doing what? They're investing long term. Okay? And what was in the Wall Street Journal this morning? Now, I advise all of you people to read the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times. You've got to read that because that keeps you up to date. California, now here's what California did. They retroactively are reaching back to tax startup businesses that sold before. And so these people sometimes are facing $40,000, $60,000, $250,000 worth of tax retroactively. Now, you start doing that, and what happens? Businessmen say, well, am I going to invest in California? How do I know what it's going to be? You see, one of our major problems today is regulatory and legal uncertainty. We don't know what the Supreme Court is going to do. We don't know what the state courts are going to do. And how many would you invest in a business if you didn't know what would happen? Last night I was with the director of Chrysler Corporation. He told me that for them to bring a car to market, just to do the regulations, especially if you're going across borders, not to manufacture the car, not to design the car, but to go through the regulations, $1.2 billion has to be invested for every single product that they bring online. And he said, we don't know where we're going to get the money because there's not enough capital out there to borrow in the capital markets. You see? Now, when you have that kind of regulation and you have that kind of load, remember when I ran my business, I could tell right away if I had made money by the break-even point. Right? All of you are taking accounting. You all know break-even points, right? We get to $50,000. We made $500,000 a month. We broke even. Every dollar after that's 50 cents. So when you add regulations, guess what? They aren't a dollar. Excuse me, because Chrysler, to get that $1.2 billion, is probably going to have to sell $2.4 billion just to cover the regulatory cost. And so one of the things that we have to push for is regulatory and legal certainty and reasonableness. Okay? The laws have to be reasonable. And that's something that every small businessman or large businessman is facing. The sacredness of contracts. Okay, contract has to be sacred. Now, when we stuck the stock of the bondholders of Chrysler and we stuck the bondholders of General Motors, and everybody said, oh, well, they don't have the debt anymore. Well, that's not exactly what happened. Because remember, every bankruptcy, there's a whole lot of people holding paper that can't collect. There's a whole lot of pension funds and little old ladies that suddenly were out in the street, you see. And so now it's becoming, and even a character like George Soros, writing in the Financial Times, has come out and said, and he's, believe me, no friend of the free market. He's complaining that there's no legal and regulatory certainty. Now, the guys at the top, you always look at the guys on the top on the other side. And when they're saying this kind of thing, you know that a type of reform is coming. We have to encourage entrepreneurship. And I think Northwood, of all schools, is probably the best at doing that. And that means we've got to encourage thinking. Okay? Next. When other people talk in my class, you know what I do? I stop. Okay? So if you want to have a conversation, I'm a professor, and I'm known to be a pretty strict one. Okay? Okay. We have to strengthen the family. The rabbi was absolutely right. Now, I don't want to get into a debate on the social issues because I'm probably much more conservative than he is on that, so I'm going to leave that alone. But remember, our fertility rate last year, 0.74. That's replacement is 2.1. Okay, now just to give you an example of what that meant, my father had 6 children. When my mother got sick, each one of us spent an evening with Mom. I spent two, because I was the crown prince, the oldest son. If you're the oldest, you're going to find out responsibility comes to you very quickly. Okay? Now I have friends of mine whose parents are sick, and there's one. So they have 6 nights. So in other words, you need to have a young population coming up to bear the burden of what's going on. And the family structure is where people learn courtesy, they learn manners, they learn work habits, they learn family traditions, and break that, and that's broken. And most sociological studies will tell you today that that's one of our major problems. We have to encourage savings and capital formation. Okay? It isn't spending that makes things run. Okay? It's what? It's savings and capital formation. And I will give you this advice, and it worked for me. Save 10% of everything you earn, and you will be financially independent by the time you're about 55. In other words, when you get your first job or you get your first business, go to the credit union and say, look, I'm going to make $1,000 a week. Let's say not that you're all going to make that, but let's hope, right? Take $100 out every week and put it into the credit union and let it compound. And by compounding, guess what will happen? You will be financially independent. And there's nothing in the world like that. Okay? There's nothing in the world like that. So if your boss, because remember, you're probably going to have about 4 or 5 careers in your lifetime. When that career ends, guess what you got? You got the nest egg. And that's extremely important. Leisure time. Most inventions are not done in large corporations. John Jukes, in his book, talking about enterprise and talking about how inventions are made, they're made in somebody's garage. And in order to do that, you need leisure time. You need to have the time to sit back and look at it from a long-run point of view. And our society should encourage leisure time. I remember when the Reagan administration wanted to go from 180 days in school to 200. And I objected. I said, the kids need explore time. Okay? They don't need to be in the classroom 200 days a year. They need 180 days, then they need plenty of time to go out and build tree houses and learn and invent and build cars in their garage and learn the joy of actually doing things. You don't learn that in the classroom. And so when we get back to it, we say the last thing and the most impressionable thing, or the most important thing, excuse me, is the concept of subsidiarity. Okay? Things work best at lowest level. Now, our American Constitution embodies it in Amendment 10. Okay? One of the popes, Pius XI, in his fight against the Nazis and the communists, said what? We don't need these large totalitarian states. We need small groups of little platoons working. Okay? In other words, and Hayek said what? The Soviet Union will fall. Why? Because the information that's available to run a company is where? It's at the lowest possible level. Right? And one of the problems is, and I will tell you this, don't get into micromanagement. Okay? I used to hire about 30 teachers when I was at Walsh. When they took the class, they had the class. I didn't dictate what the textbooks were. I didn't dictate what the tests were. I didn't dictate anything. I said, I trust you. I've hired you because you know more about the subject than I do. And that's a trick. You always got to hire someone who knows more about it than you do. Okay? And take the ball and run with it. It became their property. They invested in the course. They came up with all kinds of new ideas. If I'd have gone in there and said, like the accountants wanted me to, and say, well, you know, show me your test and show me this and show me that, the course had been mine, not theirs. And so the whole concept is to bring that ownership down to the what? The lowest possible level, and then it will become very, very efficient. Now, the U.S. economy is like a caged tiger. It's ready to leap. It's ready to grow if the conditions are present. And I do think that this progressive state that started with Teddy Roosevelt about 1901 is out of gas. They're out of coal. They're like the German army that had this tremendous victory in North Africa and ran out of coal or ran out of fuel because it's no longer sustainable. This is not possible to sustain this very much longer without going into inflation and destroying the dollar, which they're not going to do. Even Obama, guess what? First time a U.S. politician, Obama, first time a U.S. politician came out in his budget and wants to do what? He wants to change the way they calculate the inflation factor in Social Security. Okay? In other words, what he wants to do is he's going to use the inflation machine to end the Social Security benefits. That's what he's going to do. But the very fact that he, a Democrat, said that shows you that they're desperate. Okay? He knows, they know that the game is over. And so what you have to do is be ready to take advantage of it. Now, the last example I'll give you of a victory was Germany, 1948. 1948, remember, Germany was the model state for progressivism and later turned into fascism. In 1948, they were on their backs. They had refugees coming out of their ears. They had lost a good deal of their territory. Their industries were in a shambles, and they had wage and price control imposed by us and inflation. And a guy got on TV who was appointed, an Austrian economist, who was appointed to be what? The economics minister, and said we're ending wage and price control. And not only that, we're going to lower taxes, and we're going to lower tariffs. I mean, these are unheard of things in Germany. And we're getting rid of the government regulation. And that set Germany on a path to be the major power in Europe today. So these things can happen very quickly. Okay? So don't be discouraged and don't be surprised as you see the other side losing steam and us gathering it. So my point to you is there is going to be some tough times. I don't think this boom is sustainable. This is all paper, okay? And you may see a pretty rough time. But at the end of this thing, okay, at the end of this mess, there's going to be a revival, and your generation's going to lead it, and your generation's going to do it, and it's there, folks, for the taking. So my advice to you is you can't plan the future, but you can prepare for it, and prepare to seize the day. Thank you very much.